Hello, welcome, Cabbage here. In War of the Visions, lately I've been complaining about PvE, so I thought I would take a video laying out what I want. I have said pretty much all of this stuff in previous videos, but we can collect everything here and maybe present it to potentially new viewers that have joined the game or joined my channel. And then in the background I'll just run some footage that I recorded from earlier today, like some farming and then some tower. But first of all, I enjoy talking about the big picture when it comes to mobile games, so that hopefully we can take a healthy approach and have more fun, less frustration. Most of us have seen or experienced an unhealthy approach to these games, and it can get bad. The topic that relates to this video is us as players understanding what kind of game we are playing and understanding what kind of players we are. My dissatisfaction with War of the Visions comes from the gap between what the game is and what I want from it. But because I understand what causes the gap, it doesn't break me up very much, and it's not leading to an unhealthy experience. Instead, it led me to basically take a break from playing and making videos for almost all of this year. But it's been clear for a while now that the game is really PvP-centric, in terms of new release design, game balance and power creep, and it being the focus of most of the hardcore players. I said in a recent video that guild battle is the thing that keeps the ship afloat. For me, as a long-term Japanese mobile game industry watcher, it's impressive to see the game pull off this balancing act to make a, financially sustainable game based on PvP play. And it's actually the trend across mobile gaming to turn the focus to PvP. It's clearly more sustainable for the companies. They must feel that they get more engagement bang for their development buck. PvE content from the developer's point of view is not as worth it to them, because a lot of it gets played once and then never again, while PvP is evergreen. It's constantly new, it's constantly shifting and refreshing itself. For new PvP, the developers just need to make new units and vision cards and occasionally a new map. I say just, but that's already a lot. But for PvE content, on top of all of that, they also need to make new game modes, or new stories, or new stages, or new enemies and bosses. So we can see how focusing on PvP content would be more attractive for developers. It's like the community is creating its own content. Magic the Gathering on mobile has gone through a pretty typical evolution of their business model. They started with pay once, play forever games with Duels of the Planeswalkers. That was all single player PvE. You go through stages, unlocking new decks and new cards and new computer opponents until you clear everything, and then you wait until they release a DLC with new cards and decks and computer opponents. You pay the fee and you can play forever, but it's within a pretty limited space. That model is generally not sustainable, which is why we don't see it as much anymore. On console games, it baffles me that games still, for the most part, in the US at least, still cost about $60, which is how much they have costed for decades. I can remember saving up $60 to buy a Chrono Trigger for the Super Nintendo. But getting back to Magic the Gathering, it eventually moved to the PvP focus models in online and arena, and those have pretty much zero story and zero versus computer play. The developers focus on new cards and sets, and a little bit on cosmetics, and it is way more successful and sustainable than the old business model. And then I called the Duels of the Planeswalkers games pay once and play forever, but that is actually a lie, because I cannot play those games anymore. The company stopped updating them and pulled them from the App Store, so they are gone, and the fees that I paid were ultimately for limited time content. We can see how the developers in War of the Visions implement things to make it so that the PvE content is not play once and never again. Tower requires multiple runs to gather materials to upgrade everything. The Nightmare quests have element missions to make you go through the same quests up to 8 times for different rewards. And of course there's all the grinding to create +5 weapons, get all the stuff from raids, etc., etc. What the developers want is constant, long-term engagement, and PvE is by nature anathema to that. I think I was spoiled by Brave Frontier and Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. Those were games that came out in the very early days of mobile gaming, so they still had very much a focus on console-style PvE gameplay. I was floored playing the high difficulty bosses for the first time in those games, because although it was the same system as old school RPGs, the fights were way more complex and difficult. It was like driving a car for years around a track, and then one day discovering the exit, and then going out into the wide world. At the moment, I have Near Reincarnation, which is more old school in that it focuses on PvE, and the one PvP mode it has is simple and pretty unchanged from launch. Thinking back to Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre, those console isometric gameplay games, I'm trying to remember what was really memorable about the battles, not including story events, and I came up with cool characters and skills, boss fights, maps, and alternative win conditions. And then we can talk about each of those in turn. First is boss fights. This is something missing from War of the Visions. Yes, there are bosses, but they completely lack a feeling of epicness. They often just feel like regular enemies with bigger sprites. They are almost always encountered with other regular enemies, which makes them feel like they are on the same level. I'm thinking of like the when Muraga changes, he's all by himself. That feels more epic than a lot of the other stuff in the game. They also don't have attacks or patterns that feel really threatening or are memorable. And I'm bringing up the idea of feel a lot, but it's really important. Like in a selection quest, you beat a couple waves of mobs, and then Omega appears, and it's like there's a little beam that shoots down and a pshh sound, and there he is, and it's like, come on, that's lame. The regular enemies in Dark Souls feel more epic than the bosses in this game. It's sad. If this were a console game, or even like Brave Exvius, there would be like a monologue from the boss. They slowly fade into the picture. They fill the screen. Epic music starts. There's like a low camera angle. And then immediately they launch a giant attack which KOs half your party. That's memorable. That's fun. The bosses are pretty boring in War of the Visions, and yet, despite all this complaining, the regular enemies are even more boring. I go into nightmare quests and I just see a bunch of generic guys standing there, and just my motivation just drains away. It's a gray, grim, personality-less slog. Next is maps. This is another thing missing. Well, good maps, anyway. Like, what is the number one defining characteristic of isometric games? What is the biggest difference between this and Brave Exvius? It's the maps, it's the layout, the ground. But it's about more than just the maps, it's about how stuff works on the map. Like, one of the most memorable fights in Final Fantasy Tactics is when Ramza and Gafgarion are on one side of a gate, and then everybody else is on the other side of the gate. The defining elements there are the gate, and then the switch that opens the gate, those inanimate objects. And everybody who's played that game knows what I'm talking about, because it's just so memorable. There is a little of that in the early story quests in War of the Visions, like you destroy a bridge, or you push over a tree, or you drain some water, or something. But they've largely abandoned that in higher difficulty content, and then even later story stuff. But there's one stage that I remember from War of the Visions, which is sadly no longer in the game. But it was before they refreshed the tower. There was an EX floor where there was like a warp, and if a certain number of the enemy priests entered the warp, then a bunch of guys would come out, more enemies. And like we had a gameplay choice. We could either, take it slow, choose to let the priests enter the warp and just, take down everybody that comes out. Or we could build it so that you had like a fast maneuverable unit to kind of weave through the bad guys, get to the warp first, and effectively turn it off. That was memorable. That was fun. And I think the fact that that level is no longer in the game is indicative of the design choices. Next is alternative win conditions. This is another thing missing from War of the Visions. But like, just off the top of my head, I can list a whole bunch. But like, protect this NPC, or escort this NPC to there, or retrieve this object and bring it over there, or destroy that thing, or steal a thing from a character, or get your team to stand on these specific panels, or move your team from one side to the other while evading traps. Maybe there's not even any enemies, or touch these different points on the map in a certain order. But War of the Visions has none of that. It has one mission for every single quest, and that is kill everything. And then finally, I skipped it, but it's because it is in War of the Visions, but that has cool characters and skills. War of the Visions has this in spades, so no problem here. But that content, that material, it also gets to shine in PvP, so it's no wonder that they would put the most effort into this. So in the end, War of the Visions is missing nearly everything that made battles memorable and fun from console tactics games. I'm giving the developers the benefit of the doubt that this is a choice on their end, that they are focusing their development and their energy and the business model on PvP, and it's not because that they are sucky game designers without the capacity to create interesting PvE. I know what kind of game this is striving to be, and I know what kind of gamer I am, and so I recognize the gap between the two. And then here at the end, I was going to kind of suggest how to improve PvE in War of the Visions, but I think by laying out like what is missing, it should be pretty clear what could be done to improve it. But coming up, we have the Chamber of Arms type content. That was some of my favorite from Brave Exvius, so I have my hopes up a little bit for that content in War of the Visions. But if I go in there and it's a bunch of just generic guys standing there with a boss, and then like there's nothing epic feeling about it, I'm going to be very disappointed. Okay, that'll do it for this video. Maybe in a future video I will talk about PvP, what I would like to see. Alright, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again. Take care.